Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you for coming by. I interviewed the chief economist for Renaissance Capital, Charlie Robertson, otherwise known as RenCap Man on Twitter, the day before yesterday, and we've published the interview. It's 35 minutes, but it really is a great spin through what's happening in the world, the tariff war, where he gave me a very interesting insight. He sees Trump declaring victory before the midterms, an emerging market rally off the back of that. We kind of can see it. It's quite nascent. It's happening right now. And he sees then a renewed tariff war somewhere in 2019. So I have had to onboard that. Argentina, we spoke about Turkey, India, Africa, very bullish about North Africa, and counterintuitively constructive about Zambia as well. And we got to Kenya, where he drew a comparison between Argentina and Kenya. His comparison being that Argentina didn't think they had an issue, and then a couple of months later realized they had one, and then it just blew up. And you'll have to watch his interview, it's really very good. He's a very interesting gentleman, and well worth listening to in full. Macro thoughts. The US 10-year yield has jumped 25 basis points in just 3 weeks, now at 3.08% and only 4 basis points away from printing its highest level since June 2011. I've read this to you endlessly, but let me read it again and just remind you I wrote it exactly 2 years ago. If volatility spikes, positions are going to be reduced en masse, or to put it another way, and to borrow the lyrics from the Eagles' Hotel California, mirrors on the ceiling, the pink champagne on ice, and she said, we are all just prisoners here of our own device. Last thing I remember, I was running for the door. I had to find the passage back to the place I was before. Relax, said the night man. We are programmed to receive. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. What is clear, I said in 2016, is that we're at the fag end of this party. And then this weekend, I was writing about the markets again and saying bubbles were beginning to burst, and that the markets had been a patient etherized upon a table. Essentially, that etherization lasted an eternity, but it's unwinding now quite dramatically. Sell-off in bonds to continue. German 10-year yields jumps to 0.5%, so you see that 10-year movement. The 30-year in the US should hit its head here, but this thing is going to get taken out. Pine cone macro. Peter Brandt, about whom I really follow very avidly, I like the way he interprets the markets. He's extremely astute. He's talking of the Nikkei breaking out into a 26-year recovering high, will now channel ATH, approximately 38,957. That's a very big call. Home thoughts. It was a beautiful early morning in Nairobi. This morning, the stars were shining bright. And I set my alarm very early, at something like 3:45. I turned round in my bed, and there was my 12-year-old Hannah, who has not been prone to come into my bed forever. And the alarm kept ringing every 10 minutes, and I was just so happy having her next to me. And then as we walked out, it was still dark. She's got an early class, something like 5:30, and the stars were all out, and I didn't say anything, and then she noticed it. I knew she would. So it really was a lovely morning for me. That crazy hot but beautiful Turkana landscape photo by Africa by light. Ruaha skies never get old. I've seen an extraordinary documentary. You see a baobab in that photograph, but there is a baobab forest, would you believe, in that national park. And there's a pride of lions called the Baobab Lions. And there's a documentary about 3 prides of lions in the Ruaha. Well worth watching if you get a chance. Meet Simba, the undisputed ruler of the Great Plains of Talik, in the Masai Mara photo by Mihir Bhajan. He might look harmless in this photo, but his roar is blood-curdling and can be heard for up to 5 miles by humans and probably even further by other lions. Came across this K. Frimpong and his Cubano Fiestas, 1977 Ghana Afro-Cuban Afrobeat High Life. And this quote by V.S. Naipaul: "I wish my prose to be transparent. I don't want the reader to stumble over me. I want him to look through what I'm saying to what I'm describing." Political reflection: South Korean President Moon Jae-in is on the left and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on the right after a signing ceremony at their summit in Pyongyang. The offers suggest that South Korean President Moon Jae-in has struck, if not gold, then certainly silver in his aim of getting the stalled denuclearization process, on which North Korea and the United States are deeply divided, back on track. So there's a lot of positive momentum that's come out of this meeting. But, I've written about this several, and I just want to touch on a few points. Firstly, the important point, the question remains, Kim Jong-un can hardly forget what happened to Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, both of whom met their ends after being defanged. So my question remains, what security guarantees can Trump provide to Kim that convince him to denuclearize? Offering up bulletproof security guarantees is the equivalent of threading the needle. Alternatively, you just do in Israel and you don't talk about it. But this, I think, still remains a key issue. I take you back to 30th of April when Kim wrote, "A new history starts now, an age of peace from the starting point of history." And I was referencing the events that took place on the Friday at the truce village of Panmunjom, and saying they were breathtaking from the perspective of Hollywood optics. The opening shot of Kim Jong-un surrounded by a phalanx of North Korean officials, later replayed as Chairman Kim sat in his presidential vehicle surrounded by his ninja bodyguards, was almost as good as the opening sequence in P.T. Anderson's Boogie Nights. This was cinema of the highest level, which is no surprise when you consider that Kim Jong-il, the father, was obsessed with cinema and amassed arguably the world's largest personal film collection, over 20,000 bootlegged 35mm screening copies. Kim Jong-il also had a penchant for Hennessy parody cognac, and for 2 years in the mid-1990s he was the world's largest buyer of Hennessy parody cognac, importing up to $800,000 of the stuff a year. And then I was talking about Kim Jong-il began his career as the head of the State Propaganda and Agitation Department, and it's clear that Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, holds the same role and evidently handles all the optics as a chip off the old block. And I said Friday was tip-top geopolitical optics. Then have a look at the footage when the signing ceremony. You can see that she's kind of got President Moon River's attention. 12th of February, I was talking about how North Korea remains the buffer state between China and more than 30,000 US soldiers parked on their doorstep in South Korea. I was quoting Lao Tzu: "Water is fluid, soft and yielding, but water will wear away rock which is rigid and cannot yield. And as a rule, whatever is fluid, soft and yielding will overcome whatever is rigid and hard. This is another paradox. What is soft is strong." And I was saying South Korea is set to be peeled off, and going by his puppy dog smiles, President Moon River will be in Pyongyang before he can pronounce Kim Yo-jong correctly. And here he is. And then September 2017, when Rocket Man was firing off all his rockets, I wrote a piece called "A Screaming Comes Across the Sky." Gravity's Rainbows, a 1973 novel by Thomas Pynchon about the design, production and dispatch of V-2 rockets by the German military. In particular, it features the quest undertaken by several characters to uncover the secret of a mysterious device named the Schwarzgerät, the black device, slated to be installed in a rocket with the serial number 00000. So as the world watches Pyongyang, I cannot help wondering if Kim Jong-un has read Pynchon, which speaks of a screaming comes across the sky. It is a curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola they must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything, always, collectively, had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. And then in 2010, I'd written about far away in distant lands lies the hermit kingdom. They've all had tiny little hands like the elves and the shoemaker. Trump's trade war enters a dangerous new phase, says Bloomberg. US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross tried to diffuse some of the tension. Because America's 10% tariff on some $200 billion worth of Chinese imports is spread across thousands and thousands of products, nobody's going to actually notice it at the end of the day, he says. To see why, it's necessary to understand something called tax salience theory. It is a basic principle of economics that consumers notice changes in market prices and react accordingly. But tax salience theory considers why consumers are more bothered by some taxes than others. For example, consumers and voters seem to be especially irritated by high gas prices. Drivers have to buy gas regularly, the price is advertised conspicuously, and higher gas expenses typically come out of consumers' discretionary income. Highway tolls collected electronically, consumers tend to mind less because they're less aware of the payment, and that leads to higher tolls, which is an interesting point. The point is, whose constituency is going to push back first? Is it going to be Xi Jinping, or is it going to be Donald Trump's? And that's what we've got to keep an eye out on. Tariff wars, who blinks first? You know what I said, this is the chicky run. I've also believed his aggressive foreign economic policy is the signature success of this administration. It's highly effective, he can keep it up. It's working a treat, particularly in the case of Iran, for example. Bitcoin to drop to $5,400, Bank of America says. Cryptocurrency surged from 400 to 19,600 in just 3 years. They're calling it the greatest investment bubble of all time. Bitcoin has slumped 65% to 6.5, but average peak to trough decline of 11 largest bubbles of all time equals 72%. There's no stopping King Dollar, robo-traders and compliance. King Dollar is unlikely to lose its crown before the end of the year. I see the dollar going stronger. I can't really see what should change that besides inflation, weaker numbers out of China, and if Europe and the ECB goes a bit more aggressive on the rate side. Red Cat Man, of course, added some great nuance. Please watch his interview. In essence, he says Trump will predict victory before the midterms, which will be a catalyst for a big EM rally. And then he expects the tariff war to resume in 2019. I tend to agree with him, and I think the market does as well. And I think, therefore, I've got to look at this all over. I was very bullish about the dollar. I've been worried about it being weaponized. And that how policymakers all over the world have got to sober up quick and get with the program. Alibaba's Jack Ma says he can't create 1 million US jobs after all, thanks to the trade war. So that's that. Judging by photos published by the Kremlin over the past month, you might think that the Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu is Putin's favorite. Currency markets, euro dollar 116.83, dollar index 94.51. We've got to keep an eye out on that now. Japanese yen 112.18, Swiss franc 0.9673, the pound 131.49. It's had a good recovery, hasn't it? Aussie 0.7258. India rupee firms up to 72.035, South Korean won 11.1932. Brazilian real 4.1315, Egyptian pound 17.9025, and the rand is at 14.66. 0.31. It's rallied a whole big figure from its lows. Dollar index, this is a chart from Pinecone Macro, who's saying it's tested the bottom of this rectangle every day lately. And I'm reviewing this. My strong dollar position is under advisement. Euro dollar, I still think is headed lower, 116.84, particularly if the interest rates widen further between Europe and the US. Price to sales ratio, this is from Charlie Bilello, Tesla 3.5, Apple 4.3, Amazon 4.6, Google 6.6, Microsoft 7.9, Netflix 12.1, Tilray 708. Tilray, a guy just waked and baked, checked his $100 option in Tilray and he's up 10,000%. It was $1.25 last week and now it's $131. It had a wild session which saw a 94% gain, wiped out in 45 minutes and then a bounce into the close. This is just extraordinary. We saw Tesla making some crazy moves in a little over a month ago. That was peanuts compared with Tilray. Look at the chart, bonkers. Commodity prices, WTI crude oil surged yesterday. We're now at $71.23. This is a bull breakout, something that Kevin Nganga at EGM was talking about a few weeks ago. Big move. Gold, that's at 1205.25. Of course, the Russians have been buying that up. Dr. Copper has been consolidating for almost 2 months here in this support zone. Bulls need to see a break above 2.74. Bears will want to see a reject here. That's from Chigo. Emerging markets, Dubai's income level as measured by gross domestic product per capita has declined on an annual basis to $37,000 in 2018 from a peak of $45,000 in 2013, according to S&P. It remains, however, the real transit state, a connection point in an interconnected century, which is something I wrote in 2014. EMAR Properties trades at about 4.8 times estimated earnings in the next 12 months, the lowest in more than 80 years. Damac is similarly at 4.8 times. Dubai in the afternoon is a photograph I took when I was there a couple of years ago. Indian rupee taking a breather, last at 72.035, but oil is going to be problematic. Local currency emerging markets debt, $6 billion iShares ETF focuses on the debt, saw its biggest inflow yesterday in more than a year. Money is starting to trickle back into local currency emerging market debt. South Sudan, this is an amnesty report. Anything that was breathing was killed. War crimes in Lear and Mayandit, South Sudan. Nearly 2 million internally displaced persons scattered across the country, around 200,000 living in protection of civilian sites on the bases of the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. Both men are Noya, who hail from Unity State. Dengai is from Grid County, Northern Unity State, and Machar is from Lear County, Southern Unity State. It's just horrible. People who fled their home villages to take refuge on islands in the swamp, so that government forces, allied youth militia, even carried out attacks on these refuges using amphibious vehicles. Use of sexual violence against women and girls during the government offensive appears to have been systematic. Demonstrate power over victims, impose extreme humiliation, destroy dignity, and fracture families community through the stigma and shame attached to survivors. Terrible. Daily Maverick talks about the elite's relentless zero-sum scramble for power and profit has given rise to corruption and kleptocracy, characterized by massive illicit financial flows that have impoverished the country. What resources would sustain the transition government, funding the bloated government of 40 plus cabinet members and 550 legislators, together with members of devolved state parliaments and administrations, will depend on oil revenue and international support. Limit short is my conclusion. By 2050, for example, more than 40% of the extremely poor people in the world will live in just 2 countries. This is the Gates Foundation, Democratic Republic of Congo and Nigeria. Africa is a young continent. Nearly 60% of Africans are under the age of 25. Compare that to 27% of Europeans. The median age across Africa is 18, 35 in North America, 47 in Japan. Human capital investments can do the same for the poorest countries in Africa. Across sub-Saharan Africa, these investments could increase the size of the economy by nearly 90% in 2050. 1/3 of African children are stunted, which means their brains and their bodies aren't developing fully. I found this powerful. I think about the future of my continent in terms of 3 questions. Are Africans healthy? Do they have access to a good education? And do they have opportunities to apply their skills? Toll from Ethiopia, bloodshed at least 58. This is Amnesty International. The Ethiopian PM pivoted away from his lofty language of love and Medema to a more assertive tone. He said, "We will not tolerate political entrepreneurs and mercantilists." So he has to step down. He remains, in my view, the most consequential arrival of an African politician since Mandela. AFDB bought insurance on $1 billion portfolio of loans from a group of investors led by Mariner Investment Group through a so-called synthetic securitization. The deal will supercharge our ability to invest in urgently needed projects across Africa, said the AFDB president Adesina. On his visit here, I wrote a piece about how the AFDB is a force multiplier, and I think that's evidence of that. Liberia loses $104 million in central bank cash, bans 15 from foreign travel. The missing amount is the equivalent of nearly 5% of the West African country's GDP. Zambia's kwacha lost more than 1% on Wednesday, hit by investor worries about the size of the nation's debt and an aid freeze by Britain and Finland. This chart is of the Kwanzaa. This is from Mark Boland, and the bonds, as you know, are in default territory. The economists in Zambia, however, hailed China's sincere efforts to pursue win-win development with African countries. South African all-share is minus 5.14% year-to-date. Dollar versus rand. The rand caught me on the hop. It's rallied sharply. The market is pricing in a rate hike. Egyptian pound, well behaved, 17.8955. At least 9 in every 10 Nigerian women trafficked to Europe come from Edo, a mostly Christian state of 3 million people, according to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Interesting story about how they're controlled by black magic. Nigerian all-share down 15.34% this year. Look at this video. Ghanaian civil servants getting ambushed by bosses and then fired for coming late to work. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 7.93% year to date. NASPA's chief executive Bob Van Dijk were not going to suck any cash out of MultiChoice. They're spinning it off. The intention is basically to have absolutely minimal debt going to MultiChoice to provide them with flexibility to make any strategic move they want to make. They have a fledgling internet streaming service called Showmax, had $500 million of cash in the bank at the end of the latest financial disclosure period in March. They're expecting to list at between 9 and 12 times its $627 million of annual core earnings, valuing it at $5.6 billion. I think they're going to come under tremendous pressure from Netflix. There's reason to worry about Kenya's fiscal position. This is Charlie Robertson in an interview in Bloomberg. Kenya's budget deficit should be a worry. According to Charlie Robertson, the Treasury projects a funding gap of 5.9% of GDP this financial year, compared with 7.2% the previous year. Falls short of the 3% target the IMF set for the state when it provided a precautionary arrangement 2 years ago. Kenya should be a country of concern for investors. So we need to see fiscal adjustment in Kenya, as we have needed the same in Argentina. Rent caps of the Kenyan currency is overvalued and should be at 120 to the dollar. Estimates the shilling will decline to 105 by the end of the year. And this is an important point. While Kenya has come under IMF pressure to do away with the cap, he says, With the rate cap, we see a fiscal argument to retain the rate cap. He's right. Especially if they're going to bump that borrowing in the domestic market. They can't afford to lose it now. The question is, are we on a sustainable fiscal plan? And the answer is no. That's Anzetze Were. They have set in motion the definite grind towards a shock, and the only thing we shall recall is its bipartisan and shared responsibility by executive and parliament. That's Kwame Owino. Kenya's finance minister cut the 2018-2019 government spending by 1.8%. Well, Nairobi all share down 8.96% year to date. It's in a bear market as of today. NSE 20 is down 21.08% year to date and has already been in a bear market.